so wonderful to see all of you here. Thank you for coming and carving time out of your busy Sunday morning. And I am Marisa Bolivar. I'm a dietitian and a nutritionist, and I'm very excited to be here on behalf of Templeton Hills Community Farm. And if you want to know more about the farm, it just disappeared. But there was a number there that you can text and you can receive updates about it. We have so many wonderful projects going on up there. It's continuing to grow and thrive. And if you've been here during a previous class, you may have mentioned that it has been a deeply meaningful project to me because it has brought our community together in such a beautiful, wonderful way during a pretty difficult time. It was actually a month before the first pandemic shut down that we opened the gates up there. And all of a sudden we could be outside together, contributing to something that would grow and become such an important piece of our community. So we also have a really fun pancake breakfast. It's all plant-based and nutritious and delicious. So if you would like to join us, it's the first Sunday of every month, and here's a little flyer for you. And come make some friends. You should also know that the farm is run by Matt Giese. He's sponsored by our church here, which is Templeton Hills Seventh-day Adventist Church. And with the help of God, he has done a really beautiful job with all the projects that are going on. So please head up there after the class if you'd like to see it. He's also graciously brought down some produce for you to take home. We're kind of in a transition phase because the summer months are, coming to a close, and then we need to turn it over for winter. So you're going to see that the produce is dipped a little bit, but it'll come back up with time. So, and that leads us to the Wholesome Kitchen. This has been a whole series on nutrition education, and today we're going to be talking about gut health. So welcome. Dr. Sherry Rogers, she's an author and internationally recognized physician in environmental medicine. She once said, "The road to health is paved with good intestines." And I truly couldn't find a more accurate quote than that, because so much of our health is affected by digestion and absorption. And so if this process is impaired, then our whole body will suffer because of it. This is magnified by people that have a tendency towards GI issues. In graduate school, I had a professor once tell me, if the soul doesn't weep, an organ will. And there's so many of us who carry our stress and our anguish, or even our joy and our excitement through the symptomology of our gut. And so it would be expressed even more in people that have that tendency. But I also think that's an important topic for this reason, because many of us suffer in silence. It's probably about 1 in 3 people that have a chronic GI issue. And while you are welcome and invited to talk about your headache socially or publicly, you don't always experience the same feeling talking about your profuse diarrhea or your debilitating constipation. That's not quite as acceptable. And so, and unfortunately, those symptoms are a lot more common than regular headaches. And so in that way, many of us suffer in silence. And then Julia Enders, she's a wonderful speaker, and she's authored a number of books, once said, "Every day we live and every meal we eat, we influence a great microbial organ inside of us, for better or for worse." And I'm now teaching at Cal Poly, which has been really a blessing. It's been a wonderful experience. But before that, some of you might recall that I had a private practice, and about half of my patients were patients that really struggle with their gut and were eager to figure out a tool set to help optimize their digestion and absorption. And what I found is that while chronic GI symptoms certainly influence our dietary choices, the opposite is also true. That what you eat has a major impact on your symptomology. So if that is you who is suffering, or maybe somebody that you know and love, my aim today is to give you some foundational knowledge to increase your understanding of the variables that most commonly affect our gut health, and then hopefully a tool set to optimize it. So this is an outline of what we're going to cover today. Firstly, what's looking good for harvest at the farm, and then we're going to unpack some food reactive definitions, as well as talk about your microbiome. That's your gut ecosystem and has a major effect on your digestion and your absorption, and tools to build it. The 5R protocol is a tool that we use in functional and integrative nutrition. It works really well for a host of ailments that aren't limited necessarily to your gut, but apply beautifully for that as well. And then some quick fixes to common gut issues and how to alleviate your symptoms with diet, as well as putting it all together, my top 10 steps to optimize gut health, and then some lovely plant-based holiday samples and recipes that were prepared by Leah and Janet Page. Thank you so much. Those recipes were donated to us by our wonderful team here, and they stayed up very late last night and got here early in the morning to prepare those for you. So please give them a warm thank you as they come around. Yes, it was a major endeavor. And you also may notice that this presentation is about nutrition. And so my goal as a dietitian is to equip you with nutrition and lifestyle measures to optimize your gut. I will not be talking about prescription medications that are aimed at treating a gastrointestinal disorder or condition, because I want you to talk to your doctor about that too. So this is what's looking good at the farm. We have lots of beautiful greens, kale, arugula and lettuce mix, as well as green onions, carrots, green beans, sweet and hot peppers. Please know the difference. Eggplant, summer squash, cucumbers, tomatoes, and microgreens. And you may notice that this is very reflective of some warm summer months, and that's because it's been so warm for us. But this is the last of it, and so now we're going to be transitioning into the colder months. So enjoy it while it lasts. All right, so I wanted to start this presentation by going over a few definitions because these terms are thrown around a lot in the world of nutrition and gut health. And before I dive into the bowels of today's topic, I wanted to explore what each of them really mean. And that way you can decide if that's something that could potentially apply to you and your belly. So the first is food intolerances. Food intolerances arise when the gut has a hard time breaking down a food. It is only a digestive problem. So it does not involve your immune system at all, and that's an important distinction. But of course, that's not to say that they can't make you feel really miserable while they're in your gut. And I think the most frustrating part of food intolerances is that they can be tricky to identify and pinpoint in the sea of possible culprits that you eat on an everyday basis. But the good part to food intolerances is as soon as the offending food has left your gut, your problems should dissipate, and then your gut can recover pretty quickly. So food sensitivities are different because that involves your immune system, and their effects can linger far longer than food intolerances. They essentially incite an immune response that can be temporary and like a less severe version of a food allergy. They're not permanent, but if you can identify them, you can also overcome them. And so that's what I mean by temporary. And then lastly, true food allergies also trigger an immune response, but that immune response is a lot more permanent. It's acute, and it's oftentimes very severe. It can even be life-threatening. So rarely does somebody have all three of these, although it's certainly possible. But all three of them can affect your gut and most certainly your quality of life. And so the name of the game is identification and then management. So let's unpack each of these a little bit more, because otherwise it's kind of confusing. So as I mentioned, food intolerances are a digestive challenge. And that's because for whatever reason, your gut is having a hard time breaking that food down. Now, just to back up for a second to get a more complete picture of this story, your body makes something special to break down food, and those are called enzymes. Enzymes are proteins that literally deconstruct whatever it is that you put in your mouth. And there's a specific type of enzyme for every type of food. And when your gut is lagging on breaking down a food, it's usually due to an enzyme insufficiency because it's not getting properly deconstructed. And then your food is passing through your gut in a slightly deconstructed manner. So this prospect might be upsetting to you, but it's quite a different story for the bacteria that live in your small bowel and hopefully your colon more than any place. Because when they see that deconstructed food come through, they get really ecstatic because now they have extra large servings of all their favorite foods. And so they gobble it up and they produce byproducts of digestion, just like you do. They produce gas. And it can also change the amount of fluid that's in your bowel, which can trigger diarrhea and constipation, and in some people, even nausea and vomiting. So you might see lots of pretty pictures of food up here, but the reason those pictures are there is because they all have something in common. They're all fermentable carbohydrates. So these are the most likely culprits for any food intolerances that you could be suffering from. So we have lactose, and I actually put this off to the side because it's the most common food intolerance. And that's found in milk as well as any dairy sugar product. So it could be yogurt, it could be cheese, and it could even be goat's milk or sheep's milk products as well. And then you have fructose, which is found in fruit as well as sugar products, namely high fructose corn syrup and honey, as well as agave nectar. Then you have fructans, which is a broader category that includes something called fructooligosaccharides. You don't need to memorize that, but that's found in wheat, onions, and garlic, as well as galactans. That also includes galactooligosaccharides and is found in legumes like beans and lentils and soybeans. And then lastly, you have polyols, which are sugar alcohols. And sugar alcohols are found in some fruits, as well as sugar-free products like sugar-free gum and mostly other sugar-free products. But it would include peaches, cherries, plums, avocados, apples, anything that has a big pit or seed would be a source of polyols. So if you're miserable with the symptoms that I mentioned, and you're wondering, how can I tell? That's really difficult to identify. One option is to consider trying a low FODMAP diet. FODMAP stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols, and you don't need to memorize that either. But it's an elimination diet that essentially guides you to eliminate concentrated sources of these fermentable carbohydrates. And then you reintroduce them slowly and you see if you have symptoms. It's not a very easy diet. It's certainly not my favorite tool, and it is not a treatment plan. It's just an identification plan. At best, it's a Band-Aid, but it doesn't treat the root cause, which is why do you have an intolerance? And so I'm going to be talking about an approach for that. But it's a great way to figure out if one of these foods is a culprit for you. I mentioned an app there, which is Monash University FODMAP Diet. That app is a really helpful tool and can be a great source of guidance for you if you're wanting to, figure out one of the culprits here. But this process typically involves 3 steps. One is determining how much you can tolerate naturally. So for instance, if you have a lactose intolerance, that would look like figuring out what sources of lactose don't cause an issue for you. So you may find that you can tolerate butter. You might be able to tolerate a really high quality yogurt, or maybe even a hard cheese. But that's where your threshold stops, right? And any more than that is when you experience symptoms. The next step would be once you pass the threshold of tolerance, can you introduce small amounts and train your gut to tolerate it? So if you have a galactin intolerance, which would be to beans, you find that every time you eat beans, you feel really gassy. Oftentimes we can train our gut how to digest it and how to secrete enough of those enzymes that they no longer bother you. So rather than going home and having a huge bowl of beans, maybe having a small amount over a period of time and reintroducing it regularly so that your gut can get the cue. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be producing galactase. And then the third step is if the answer is no, you have no tolerance, and you can't train your gut to do it, then finding the right enzyme to help you tolerate it might be a really good tool, because these are really healthy foods. They're really good for your gut. And we're going to talk about that more in a second. And so if your issue is a galactin intolerance, then Vino works really well for that. It's like a $5 supplement, and you would just figure out how much Vino do I need, alpha galactosidase, in my meal of a black bean burger or lentil tacos, so that I can enjoy foods and eat them without misery. Okay. Any questions about food intolerances? Okay. Food sensitivities. These are different from food intolerances because they elicit an immune response. So now the problem just left your gut. It's a bigger, more complex issue. And this happens because your gut did a poor job digesting a food upstream from your colon, and now your body saw that food as a threat. And it's not something that's supposed to provide nutrients and energy, but rather an immune response. So this syndrome of maldigestion is a little bit different than what we just talked about with intolerances. This relates to something called leaky gut. And so your body responded with one of two primary immunoglobulins, immunoglobulin A or IgA, and IgG, immunoglobulin G. And these are antibodies manufactured by your immune system to attack the threat. So the symptoms that you experience are really side effects of that immune response. And that can happen quickly, can take 2 minutes, or it can happen over the course of 3 days. So sometimes it can be difficult to trace your side effects back to the culprit, right? Whatever was eliciting the immune response. Because food sensitivities are a byproduct of poor digestion, the foods to which you form an adverse immune response are most likely the foods that you have the most exposure to. So if you have eggs every single morning for breakfast, your risk of developing an egg sensitivity is significantly higher than the foods that you only have on occasion. Okay, bummer, right? And those symptoms, that immune response, can encompass a lot of different clinical manifestations. It could be eczema and headaches, maybe even joint pain, which are very systemic. Those would be IgG antibodies. Or they can be a lot more gut specific, like nausea, diarrhea, constipation are very common side effects of food sensitivities. Identifying food sensitivities is really helpful because continuing to eat those foods contributes to chronic inflammation and your symptoms, which usually get worse. They don't get better. So there's 2 ways of identifying them. The economic approach is to create a food symptom journal. Basically, you would write down everything that you eat and the timing, and then you would write down your symptoms, when and what they experienced, right? What you experience. And so that could be probably encapsulated over the course of a few days, or if your symptoms drag out like constipation, it would be over the course of a couple weeks. And hopefully you can identify some themes there, because food sensitivities can be inconsistent in that you may find they're dose dependent. For instance, if I had a sensitivity to gluten, but I had a really small amount or like a really high quality flour, then my immune response would be a lot less than if I had a huge bowl of refined pasta. And so your side effects would look very different, right, from those two different foods, and in that way they're inconsistent. But food symptom journals are really helpful for identifying those themes. I can't even remember what I ate yesterday. So if you're writing it down, you're more likely to be in tune to the effect that it has. And then the other method is to get a blood test. That's certainly a quicker way. It's also a lot more costly because insurance don't cover these tests yet anyway. And they can also be not always accurate. And there's some reasons why. If you want to know, you're welcome to talk to me. But they definitely have their downfall. So if you can identify the culprit, then I would recommend strict avoidance for 4 to 6 weeks. And then sometimes you can reintroduce them and it's no longer an offending food because your immune system forgot. It forgot that it was a problem. So oftentimes these are things that we can overcome once you know what they are. Any questions about food sensitivities? Okay. So this diagram is taken from Health Takes Guts, which is not only a private practice, it's also an ebook by Diane Rishikoff. She's a wonderful integrative and functional dietitian. Her practice is solely focused on gut, and she works out of Boston. She's been a really impactful mentor to me, and she's still in private practice. She sees most of her clients via telehealth, so she is available to you, and I highly recommend this book. If you have a chronic gut issue, it's really helpful and provides lots of wonderful guidance. And you can purchase it on her website for $28. So that is certainly a resource that you can utilize. So as she points out in this diagram, when you have leaky gut and you continue to eat the offending foods that trigger an immune response, you also contribute to chronic inflammation. And one of the byproducts of inflammation is dysbiosis, which basically means a very unhappy, dysfunctional home to all the bacteria that reside in your gut. We're going to talk more about that in a second. So as you can see, this trifecta creates an ongoing challenge and may be the root cause of your struggle. And since the product of this trifecta is food sensitivities, you can see that on the right coming off of the triangle, you almost always have to work backwards and treat all three variables in order to achieve a really good resolution to a chronic problem. So as I mentioned before, true food allergies are also an adverse immune response to food. However, this reaction is mediated by a totally different antibody. It's called the IgE antibody. This antibody is special in that it hits you really hard and really fast. So your reaction could be as short as 2 minutes or as long as 2 hours. It rarely takes more than that to get some big side effects. And your side effects will follow suit. So it could be anything from hives and itching to flushed, pale skin, low blood pressure, constriction of airway, swollen tongue, swollen throat, wheezing, trouble breathing, rapid pulse, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness, fainting. These are all very systemic effects of a true food allergy. True food allergies are usually diagnosed by a history of classical clinical symptoms, like I just mentioned, and evidence of a food-specific IgE skin prick test or serum-specific IgE testing. basically you would call your doctor and say, hey doc, I almost died eating a strawberry. Can I please have a lab slip for IgE strawberry? Okay, and then you would get that confirmed with a blood test. Or you could see an allergen or allergist and opt for a skin prick test, which is basically a topically applied allergen to your skin. And if you developed a notable response from that, then that would be confirmation of your food allergy as well. Lots of foods can cause allergies. So it could be any food, really, that can cause an allergy. But the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004 requires that major allergens are listed on the food ingredients label. And they have a list of the top 9, which is milk, eggs, peanuts, which is a legume, not a tree nut, right? Soybeans, wheat, shellfish and finned fish, tree nuts, and newly added to the list is sesame. Because over the last couple of decades, we've seen a dramatic increased incidence in the issues caused by sesame with food allergy. Unfortunately, management requires strict avoidance. There's all kinds of clinical trials going on. This has been a topic for a lot of funding and attention, especially in the last 10 years as we see the incidence of true food allergies increase and their prevalence. And so there's all kinds of immunotherapy drugs that are being proposed for this and desensitization programs, but we still have a lot of progress to make. They're very difficult to overcome and a lot more serious. Any questions about food allergies? Yeah. That's a really good question. I'm not sure. Children are tricky in that they don't have a fully developed immune system. And I know that's especially challenging with food sensitivities, but probably good to consult an allergist. Actually, we have someone in town, Dr. Janet McLennan, who is a wonderful resource for that. She's a great allergist. Yeah. I know that she sees a number of kids in her private practice. Any other questions about food allergies? Okay. Yeah.
I'm just curious. You get a consult with the Diane. Do you know about how much that is or how long it takes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. She actually has 2 or 3 dietitians working underneath her, but I imagine that it's at least a few weeks and it's expensive. I think she does take insurance, and actually I have another wonderful local resource. She's a dietitian named Crystal Corcoran. I have her cards up here, and she also practices functional and integrative nutrition, and so that might be an alternative. She also accepts insurance, so between those two. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
Any primary care doctor can order a food panel allergy. I don't know if you already said that.
Yeah.
It's just a click of a button.
Yes.
Panel for those main foods.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. And that's a great resource for true food allergies. Most people have food sensitivities instead of food allergies, so that wouldn't be captured by a food allergy test. However, if you're wanting to rule out the big guns, that would be a great way to do it. You can also order specific food sensitivity tests through your primary care doctor, but food sensitivity testing, just to give you a vague idea, is a very specific process. So you could say, hey doc, I'm worried about wheat. Can I have an IgE for wheat, which is true food allergy, and an IgG? They usually won't offer you any other antibody testing for that. And gluten is a very complex protein. And so you're really only testing in that like one-dimensional way your immune response to one of the amino acids of gluten. There's 33. And so if you order IgG through your doctor, which you can totally do, it just may not give you a true positive. And so that's the pitfall. So you could order a more specific panel for gluten that tests your antibody response or your immune response to every single amino acid, all 33 of them. But that's where you have to pay out of pocket. Your primary care doctor can't do that usually, unless you see maybe a naturopath. But yeah, what was your question? Did you have a question?
That was my question.
Yeah. What is the microbiome? Ooh, we have our first sample. Good timing. We need a snack to get through this material. And so this is the orange spiced yams. Is that right?
Yes, and cranberry.
And the cranberry, yes. So this is orange spiced yams and the fresh cranberry relish. This doesn't have an added sweetener to it. It's naturally sweetened. So it's a nutritious and delicious side dish for the holidays. It may be a little more nutritious because the cranberries are cooked from raw. So they're from fresh cranberries, fresh raw cranberries. All right. Okay, so our microbiome. Jump back into it. Our gut is really important on so many different levels, but a huge reason for its importance and its ability to shape the whole quality of your life is due to your microbiome. There's about 100 trillion microbes, that's short for microorganisms, that reside in your colon for the most part. And most of these microbes are bacteria, but there's certainly some viruses and some yeast that are present also. And they typically fall into 3 categories. Those that provide the host with a health benefit, the host is you. So those that benefit you. Those that harm you, we like to call those pathogens. Those are the bad guys. And those that are neutral parties. They don't do anything good or bad for you. They just hang out there. And this remarkable ecosystem is called your microbiome. Okay? So when our microbiome is happy and balanced and thriving, we feel really good. But when we have an overgrowth of one little bug, or maybe we have a pathogen that grew to out of check proportions, or we have an imbalance, or maybe we don't have enough good little bugs, then that imbalance creates something called dysbiosis, and we usually suffer because of it. What's important to realize about these microbes is that they truly run the show. There's more bacteria cells in your body than you have human cells. So it really is our microbial self. It's an extension of us. And they have a lot of participation in your nutrient digestion and absorption, excuse me. They help protect the integrity of your gut lining. They signal satiety cues like hunger and fullness, as well as influence food cravings. They participate in detoxification, getting all of the toxins out of your body. They can also contribute to inflammation, for better or for worse, as well as neurotransmitter production, that's your body's chemical messengers, weight management, mood and behavior, immune function. In fact, 2/3 of our immune system is in our gut related to these bugs. Focus and energy levels, and then gene expression, how and when genes are expressed. The research on these gut microbes affecting illness is really overwhelming. We have a substantial evidence-based library just related to microbial life in your gut and how that influences your wellness. In fact, I think it's hard to find a medical condition for which your microbiome is not involved. And lucky for us, we can affect this ecosystem with every meal that we consume, for the better or for the worse. We can feed the good bugs by eating lots of nutritious plant-based fibers, or we can feed the bad bugs by eating what we call a meat-sweet diet, meat, damaged fats, and sweetened foods. And that, of course, would contribute to dysbiosis, things that are getting out of balance. So one of the ways that you can support your microbiome is with the use of fermented foods. Fermented foods are prepared in such a way that healthful bacteria and yeast are able to grow and ferment the food. The bacteria actually feed on the food, which breaks it down, and it makes it easier for people to digest. So that's one of the first benefits. The second benefit is if there's enough bacteria present there to be breaking down the food, there's also enough bacteria present to provide your ecosystem, your gut microbiome, with an advantage, which is a little boost in the natural flora that resides there. So we could consider this a naturally occurring probiotic. And some of these foods are some of the more concentrated foods that you can buy or you can make your own in the comfort of your own kitchen that will provide you with a probiotic benefit. So kefir is probably the most concentrated of these. Kefir undergoes multiple rounds of fermentation. It's a fermented milk product, and it is extremely concentrated in probiotics. Each glass, and I'm talking like a little juice glass, maybe 8 ounces, has anywhere from 2 billion to 20 billion colony-forming units. So it really is like a supplement in a glass, and it's a great tool for somebody that's looking to incorporate some more probiotics into their diet. Kimchi is a traditional Korean fermented cabbage. Sometimes it's in the form of radishes. Pickles are another fun probiotic, not nearly as concentrated as kefir. Just make sure that you're buying a fermented pickle or cucumber in salt instead of vinegar, because vinegar would kill off some of those, if not all of the microbial life. So you would find that in the refrigerated section, not necessarily on the shelf. Even in the refrigerated section, you have to check the label that it doesn't add vinegar, and most of them unfortunately do. Miso is a fermented soybean paste. It's a thick paste that you typically would add into your cooking. It's best known for that umami flavor that's more traditional in Asian cuisine. Natto is similar to that. There's a picture actually on the bottom right of natto, which is also fermented soybeans, but they're whole soybeans. It's not ground into a homogeneous paste. And it doesn't have that umami flavor as much of as like an earthy bacon flavor, I guess you could say. Yogurt is the cousin of kefir, except there's a red flag warning on yogurt. And that is a lot of yogurts on the food marketplace now add thickening agents, and it's really hard to find a naturally thickened yogurt. And so thickening agents would look like guar gum, gelatin, cornstarch, tapioca, pectin even, and all of those products thicken the yogurt independent of the probiotics, meaning that the probiotics didn't thicken the yogurt. There should be enough probiotics that the yogurt gets thickened without the use of the thickening agents. So the downside to that is that there's not enough probiotics to digest lactose, if you're lactose intolerant, or to provide you with any kind of benefit. It's really just so the food company can say it's a yogurt, because live active cultures were added without necessarily a health benefit.
That's a lot of sugar.
And a lot of sugar, yeah. But if you're seeking to incorporate yogurt as a probiotic, it would just need to be the option without a added thickening agent. Pectin is kind of actually up for debate because it's a really common thickening agent, but it's also a prebiotic. And so you kind of have to like, well, how bad is that? I don't know. Sauerkraut is a fermented cabbage, and then kombucha is a fermented tea. So these are all fermented foods that have probiotic advantages. Yeah. Prebiotic is where we're going to go in 2 slides.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Does your gut need like yogurt every day?
So the question was if your gut needs yogurt every day. If you are purposely incorporating yogurt as a probiotic, maybe as a substitute for a probiotic supplement, and you're using it in like a nutraceutical therapeutic way, then that would be one option, is to incorporate yogurt on a daily basis. But it takes time to change your gut ecology. That doesn't happen overnight. So anything that you do more consistently would have a better outcome.
And what about vinegar and pickles? What did you say? It kills off the probiotics?
It does, yeah. Vinegar is just a great antimicrobial. And so even though it would be fermented, if it's fermented or preserved using vinegar, then you would lose the microbial life. So if it's fermented using salt, then the microbial life would still be thriving enough to provide you with an advantage. Yeah. And I meant to say preserved, not fermented. Sorry, that's kind of confusing. Yes.
What about the use of apple cider?
Possibly. Yeah.
What?
Oh, the use of apple cider vinegar. I mean, most food products on the market don't lean on apple cider vinegar as their first tool, but I would need to learn about that more. That's a really good question. I imagine that there's got to be some loophole there. Keep those probiotics alive. Yeah. Natto? Natto is a fermented whole soybean.
So it's like the soybean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What makes it different?
Well, it's fermented, and so it has probiotic activity in it. Yeah, it was inoculated with a culture, and it is a probiotic in that way, as a fermented food. But it's different from miso. Miso is fermented soybeans as well, except it's in a homogeneous paste that has more of an umami flavor.
So is it like sold in jars, or like jars?
Yeah.
Frozen?
It's not something that we see commonly. I believe that it's normally in the refrigerated section of the grocery store. Yeah. Whereas miso is probably a lot more shelf stable until you open it, and then it would need to go in your fridge. Yeah.
Miso and natto have soy.
Yes.
If you're trying to stay away from it.
Yeah. If you're trying to stay away from soy products, then natto and miso are probably not a great option for you. Yeah. Yeah. Pickles are preserved in salt and have a very high salt content, sodium content. Yeah. Yeah.
What do they add to the soy microbes that make it go into natto?
That's a really good question. So the question was, what strains are added to natto to inoculate it? Yeah, I would have to look that up. I'm not sure. There's lots of strains that are used for fermenting foods, and I'd have to look it up. I'm not sure. Good question. Yeah, question in the back. So many good questions about fermented products, especially for somebody that doesn't make fermented products in the comfort of my own kitchen. That's a really good question. I'm not sure. But yeah, I do know that there's a host of wonderful cookbooks and websites that can be a really good resource if you're wanting to experiment with some fermented products. Sure. Yeah. Not many that I've seen. I think that the prevalence, the availability of plant-based yogurts is definitely increasing. And so I think alongside of that, kefir will catch up to it. But it seems like that is not something that's widely available yet, at least in the concentration of a dairy kefir. Yeah. Uh-huh. Tempeh, typically, I mean, that is a fermented soy product. However, I believe that it typically incorporates other foods. I know, namely wheat gluten, and it just tastes a lot different. It's also more of a solid product, and so you would use it differently in your cooking. Okay. So if you tried fermented foods and you felt like that wasn't enough, the next level of intervention would be a supplemental probiotic. Probiotics are live bacteria, like what you would see in a fermented food, that certainly have a lot of health benefits. And there is so much potential, I believe, for probiotics to provide us with a substantial health benefit. So before you commit yourself to a supplement, though, the most important thing I can tell you is that if it's not broken, don't fix it, because your gut might be thriving perfectly by itself. And if you throw something into the mix, it's going to change it. And so if your gut is functioning really beautifully by itself and you're regular and your stool seems healthy and all of that, then adding in a probiotic is definitely going to change that. And so I wouldn't be too quick to intervene. It might be a disservice rather than an aid. Secondly, if you've attended one of my classes in the past, you may remember that I'm not a huge fan of supplements, because supplements are extremely unregulated, especially, well, everywhere, but especially in the United States. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, just probiotics alone. And so it's important to understand that there's a lot of poor manufacturing practices, there's a lot of contaminated products, and if you decide to incorporate a probiotic supplement, it's important to lean on a high quality professional brand for that, just so you're not getting something that is contaminated with a pathogenic strain or something to that effect. So I wrote down a few examples here. The bottle on the right is, I think, a great generalized option. It's a very diverse product, meaning that it has 5 to 10 strains of bacteria at least. I think this one has 12. And bacteria strains cross-feed each other, but different probiotics will have different effects because every strain will have a different type of impact. And so one of the best things you could do probably is educate yourself on what strains might be the most helpful for you. If you really wanted an educated opinion, you could undergo a stool profiling analysis. As you send in a sample of your stool, and they will analyze it in a lab of all the microbial life that is there, which might include underabundant populations of bacteria as well as overabundant or anything in between. But the reason that's important for you in choosing a supplement, not that you need to do that, is just to know that different probiotics have different effects. So that's a great general option, but Ultra Flora IB by Metagenics is probably better for bloating and cramping and urgency. So it's not something that you would take for constipation, right? It's a different tool set. Or Energetic Intensive by Integrative Therapeutics is a very high potency probiotic. So that would be better for if you had a hefty amount of antibiotics and you wanted to repopulate your gut ecology, or maybe you had a colonoscopy and like you wiped things out, or you had a bout of foodborne illness and you wanted to repopulate your gut flora, it would give it, you know, a little bit more of a quicker fix. Yeah.
You have different qualities.
Yeah. Really hard to know. Yeah.
So how do you know?
That's a really good question, and unfortunately, I don't have a simple answer for you. But if you're not sure, you can always just fall back on our general rule of thumb, which is to choose a diverse probiotic. And that means it has at least 5 to 10 different strains of bacteria, because bacteria do cross-feed each other. Let's say you were really educated and wanted to be super thorough about it, and so you sent in a fecal sample to the lab and you got back this huge report of 300 microbes in your stool. And, you know, if you wanted to feed those underabundant populations, not all of them can be captured in a supplement. Not all of them can be encapsulated in that way. And so you would take a diverse probiotic, which would feed, those other populations would feed the families that are underabundant. So I think the rule of thumb there is just that if you lean on a diverse product, you'll probably get a benefit. And then you need to be patient, because you can tear down Rome overnight, but you can't build it. So you might eat a really sketchy food and be super sick for like 2 weeks, and see huge changes in your steady state population in that way. But in order to build it back up or change your gut ecosystem for the better, it really does take 2 weeks at least, if not 3 months. And then you're kind of gauging, right? Like what needs to be corrected there. Should you switch a supplement? Is that the right fix for you? Yeah.
So if you have a colonoscopy, if you want to get older, so that takes away everything, right?
No, not everything, but it would really change your gut ecology. The only thing that you can lean on there is that most people are creatures of habit and eat the same way before and after a colonoscopy, unless you learn something and you're like, well, I'm going to change my diet, right? But typically you would start eating normally again once you feel kind of back to normal from your colonoscopy, and then your gut would repopulate in a very similar way. Your gut ecology is very reflective of your diet. In fact, if you handed me one of those fecal reports, I could tell you what kind of diet you have. It's very obvious. Yeah.
So what's the best way to build up our gut health?
That is such a good question, and I'm going there next, actually. Yeah. Yeah, George.
We had a situation where we had antibiotics being prescribed. We also were told that we should get a good probiotic to take right along with that.
Sure, not at the same time, but yes.
When we're going to get the probiotics in the health food section, they said that refrigerated probiotics are better than those that aren't. So I just wanted to
Yeah. I see where they're going with that, but that's not always true. So it's kind of hard to lean on that. Yeah. So it depends on what is encapsulated and how well they're thriving. Encapsulating live organisms is very difficult, but that's why it's also important to lean on a good brand, and it's sometimes difficult to distinguish. Yeah. Yeah.
What was that about the probiotics and antibiotics at the same time?
Oh, the question is probiotics and antibiotics at the same time. If you are taking your antibiotic at the same time as your probiotic, it's going to kill it, right? Well, antibiotics are good at killing bacteria, and they kill the good guys and the bad guys. So if you're taking a probiotic at the same time as the antibiotic, I would take it as far apart as possible, like 12 hours, right? Because then you would have a better chance of those probiotics surviving. The same is true for other things like alcohol and coffee. Don't take your coffee at the same time as your probiotic. You'll kill it. Okay. You're like, shoot, all these years. Okay. So prebiotics. This is one of your best tools for building up your great gut microbiome. Prebiotics are fuel. They are the most important food source for the healthy bacteria that live in your gut. So not only do these bacteria, the good guys, eat that food, but they use it to grow and to thrive. We have to feed those good little bugs. Okay, so some of the richest source of prebiotics you're going to find on this list, but these are all fibrous sources of food. They're all plant-based foods, which means that all plant-based foods provide some degree of prebiotics. They're all great sources of energy and nutrients for the good little bugs in your gut. These just are particularly concentrated in fructans, namely inulin. That's one of our best prebiotic tools. I wrote that next to chicory root because that's how they commercially extract inulin. You can find that captured in a bottle that you would buy in the supplement section, but these prebiotics are way more effective in a natural food source because they also provide your body with a benefit. It's like a win-win. Feed the good bugs and feed your body, right? They help you with your digestion. They help your immune system. It truly is a win-win. So the concentrated sources of prebiotics here are particularly concentrated in inulin. It's a type of fructan, but you'll also see galactans heavy on this list. And if the little clip about food intolerances and FODMAPs applied to you, you would also notice that these are all FODMAP foods. So very inconvenient. But that's no coincidence because FODMAPs feed the good bacteria in your gut. They ferment there for a reason. So hopefully without making you too miserable. But that's why you can't stay on a low FODMAP diet, is because they're all really important prebiotics or fuel for the healthy bacteria that reside in your gut.
So these are fiber, prebiotics of fiber. So
Yeah.
if someone's having constipation, these are helpful?
Yes. And I'm going to address constipation specifically. But what is tricky about this is if you struggle with constipation and you're incorporating lots of fiber, but it's fermenting and making you miserable, it can cause constipation too. So if you are FODMAP intolerant, like you see some foods on here that make you miserable, then maybe ease up on those foods until you can deal with your constipation in a more productive way, knowing that you need to reintroduce them at some point because they're really good for your gut, right? Yeah. Hopefully that'll address it. So these are the oat patties, right? Okay. Yeah, so this is sort of like a alternative to meatloaf, I guess you could say. Yeah, it's more hearty. You can also use it as a veggie burger in place of that. And I believe this is served with a creamy mushroom gravy. Yeah, so this recipe calls for quick oats, which is a slightly more processed version of an oat, right, as a whole grain. And so it does cook quicker. The quicker a fiber cooks, the more processed it is, right? Because they process out the fiber. The fiber is what requires a longer cooking time. So rolled oats requires more cooking because it has more fiber in it.
Yeah, so I've made them with rolled oats before, actually, and they're good. It's just the quick oats make them stick together a little bit more. So they don't have eggs to bind them, but because the quick oats are, I don't know, a little bit of that consistency, I don't know what you call it. It just, they gel together a little better. But you can totally make them with rolled oats. The taste is the same. It's just a little different consistency.
Thanks, Leah.
I probably would do it with
All right, so polyphenols are beautiful because they come loaded in color. They're very vibrant, right? Everything on this list is really colorful and beautiful, and that's the antioxidants that are making them that way. And high antioxidant foods, specifically these polyphenols, give the bacteria in your gut a nutrient source. So it's not just energy now, it's also nutrition. It can really help your gut flora thrive. So another piece of the puzzle in building up a strong gut microbiome. Yeah. Ooh, yeah, that's such a good point. So coffee is the question there. Because coffee is a double-edged sword. It has a lot of polyphenols, which is actually one of the things that impairs nutrient absorption. If you were to take coffee or have your cup of coffee at the same time as like your vitamin D or a multivitamin, it would wipe out the absorption because polyphenols do bind to other micronutrients but coffee can also impair the lining of your gut. So it deserved to be on this list because it's so high in polyphenols. It has a lot of nutrient value in that way. But the other end of the sword is that it does impair the lining of your gut and can be really hard on you. So it's too bad. Not the perfect food. Although it felt like it to me when I was drinking it this morning. Like, this is the perfect food.
So would you say this like a 1 cup a day, for example, would that a lot of damage?
I guess it depends on why you would be limiting yourself. So the question was, at what point did you cross the threshold for coffee? And if you have a host of gut symptoms or a really big challenge with a particular symptom, like acid reflux, diarrhea, constipation, I would say no coffee is better than any coffee. So the question was about black tea, and that seems like a really nice alternative. It has lots of polyphenols, but has less caffeine, so it wouldn't be quite as hard on your gut. Typically, coffee hits people the hardest. Sometimes actually espresso is better tolerated than coffee, just because it has a different pH. People seem to tolerate it better. Yeah, but even decaf coffee can be really hard on people's gut.
Did you say
Espresso?
Oh, espresso.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like that would be harder on your gut, but a lot of people tend to tolerate it better than regular coffee. Yeah. Okay, so the 5R protocol. This is like the best gift I can give you because it works for so many ailments and you can apply it to all kinds of different things. So it's comprised literally of 5 R's, 5 R steps. Remove, take out the offending foods, right, or beverages, the things that are tearing your gut down. Get them out of there so that you can facilitate healing. It's hard to heal when you have an inciting or irritating food in your diet. Replace what's missing in order to facilitate healing. What other tools can you add to the picture in order to achieve the results that you want? What can you do to repair the lining of your gut and build back its integrity? Re-inoculating it with some helpful strains of bacteria is another wonderful tool. And again, you could use prebiotics, fermented foods. It doesn't have to be a supplement necessarily. And then 5 is relax, and that can't be understated. I have a lot of patients that only did the 4R protocol. I was like, no, 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 where's the 5th? Because you could do everything perfectly, and if you forget the last R, you may not have any improvement in your symptoms, because oftentimes that gut-brain axis is way more powerful than we realize. So it's a super important piece of the puzzle, managing stress. All right, so number 1, remove. That's a long list. But of course, it depends on what's going on. So again, this is focused on extracting the variables that are causing the problem or maybe just contributing to it. Foods that irritate and damage the lining of your gut wall include NSAIDs, aspirin, ibuprofen, very difficult on the lining of your gut wall. Prednisone, alcohol, caffeine, added sugar, sugary foods, processed refined starches, that would be white flour, processed vegetable oils like corn and soybean oil, as well as trans fats, so fried foods, highly processed fatty foods, additives and preservatives, which would be on the ingredients list, the things that you don't recognize. If you can't pronounce it or you have no idea what it is, you could probably throw it in that category. And then, of course, artificial sweeteners. And then I have another note there. Yes?
You mentioned oils. If coconut oil is antimicrobial, does it therefore help or not help?
Good question. Is coconut oil antimicrobial? Yeah, but would it negatively alter your gut microbiome? I wouldn't say it's a great fat, but would it specifically negatively affect your gut microbiome? I couldn't tell you. I'd have to look that up. Yeah.
What oil would you recommend?
For cooking, the oil that I would most comfortably lean on is avocado oil because it doesn't become damaged at high temperatures, and most of us cook at higher temperatures, which is really anything over medium low on the stovetop. And avocado oil is really strong, it's pretty good for us, and damaged fats hard on our gut. So this would apply really well. That's a great question. Thank you. So the reason that I mentioned on there to consider eliminating gluten is because gluten activates something called zonulin. So zonulin is a protein that modulates the permeability of your intestinal wall. And so you can think of your intestinal wall, you know, like this. There's tight junctions that keep it closed so that there's not traffic readily passing in between, right? Well, zonulin is the only known protein moderator that controls that permeability. And so zonulin, interestingly enough, gets activated by gluten in everybody, not just in special people like me. So when zonulin is activated, it becomes permeable. And now all of a sudden that gatekeeper allows traffic to more easily pass into the bloodstream. That's how we develop that leaky gut syndrome. Now, most people recover from that really quickly, but some people, like me, don't, right? And we don't bounce back as quickly. And so that can become a more chronic issue, which I dubbed leaky gut earlier in the presentation. And you can develop more food sensitivities that way. So because we know that is true for everybody, if you have a host of GI symptoms, you want to implement this protocol, then gluten is definitely worthwhile to consider. And that would be in any wheat product. Gluten is actually the storage protein in wheat, rye, and barley. So, but lucky for us, there's a lot of gluten-free products. Another thing that would be important for you to consider removing from your diet, at least temporarily, is foods that you know bug you. So if every time you eat a food, you react to it or you feel miserable, those foods are definitely worthwhile taking out for a period of time and being really compliant about that, because clearly they're irritating you. They're causing inflammation. And so it's hard to facilitate healing when you're continuing to introduce something that is irritating, right? And staying hydrated so you can flush it all out of your system. Replace. So that would be adding back in anything that is needed in order to optimize digestion. So stomach acid can be supplemented with. Your stomach produces hydrochloric acid and pepsin. Pepsin's actually an enzyme in order to not only kickstart digestion, but also to serve as a catalyst of all the digestive aids to come. And your stomach acid would be impaired, or I should say your gastric pH should be impaired or will be impaired as you age, or if you've taken a host of antacids and acid blockers. So H2 blockers, proton pump inhibitors like omeprazole and Nexium, or Tums, those all impair our gastric pH. If you decide that you wanted to incorporate hydrochloric acid into your regimen, I do encourage you to do that under the watchful care of a practitioner, and they can help you do that carefully so that you're not adding to damage. But a really safe alternative would be lemon water. So having a little bit of lemon water with your meals might achieve all the benefit that you need in that process. Digestive enzymes is an art and a science. Like I mentioned earlier, enzymes are very specific to the foods that you eat. And so finding the right enzyme in the right amount can be a very helpful aid, especially when it comes to tackling food intolerances. This is a great middle of the road option. Integrative Therapeutics makes Similase. I think it's not super potent, but enough to give many people an added benefit, a noticeable benefit. If you want to stick to something very benign, papaya enzyme, which is a chewable little tablet, can achieve all the benefit that you need if you feel like you would like to start with something to aid your digestion. But not everyone needs enzymes. It's just a tool in your toolbox. And then, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, you have pharmaceutical grade enzymes, which are pancreatic enzymes, and those are a lot more potent. And of course, you would need to be under the watchful eye of a doctor. Bile is in the same category as stomach acid. Cleansing waves, though, are something that you can do easily in the comfort of your home. Cleansing waves, or your migrating motor complex, is basically the contractibility of the smooth muscle of your gut, which propels food all the way from start to finish. And sometimes that migrating motor complex gets a little lazy. And so this is particularly true if you have SIBO, been diagnosed with SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. IBS is very commonly misdiagnosed as SIBO. And basically food is sitting and rotting in your small gut and causing you misery, a lot of gas, bloating, belching. Those are all signs of SIBO. And so something that you can do to restore your cleansing ways is fasting. So no snacking, but breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you are done after dinner until breakfast the next day. So give your gut time to clean itself out so that things aren't sitting there fermenting for hours on end. Those fasting windows between meals should be at least 4 or 5 hours long in order to achieve that. Another thing that you can do is gargling and singing at the same time. So you gargle and like hum a song, and your family's gonna think you're really weird, but you would do that past the point of comfort. So you gargle for as long as you can, singing happy birthday as many times as you can. And that actually does a really good job stimulating that migrating motor complex. And then nutrients. If you have had a lot of gut inflammation and irritation, then thinking about vitamin D, maybe getting a vitamin D test so you know how much to take. Vitamin B complex is another thing that commonly suffers with poor digestion. And then repairing. What can you do to repair your gut wall? For the first thing, of course, is optimizing your digestion from the very start, because chewing is your best mechanical way of doing that. So really taking the time to chew your food thoroughly. That's something that a lot of us forget about, but being intentional about that, making sure that you have sufficient vitamin D status, because that actually has a host of benefits for our gut. A 6-week trial of L-glutamine can also be really helpful. I use that commonly in patients that have chronic diarrhea. L-glutamine is an amino acid that is the choice fuel for the cells that line your innermost gut wall. And you would really only need it for 6 weeks. It shouldn't be longer than that, just like the enzymes, usually a 6-week thing to kind of train and repair your gut. Pure encapsulations makes a really great product. It's a powder, and typically I recommend 1 to 3 grams a day in order to achieve that. Lots of healthy plant-based fats, plant-based oils, and nuts and seeds, and aloe vera juice can also be actually really healing, and they sell that at the grocery store. Lots of medicinal properties in aloe vera juice. Reinoculate. So we talked about prebiotics, fermented foods, probiotics, polyphenols. That's your best tool set to really encourage that healthy flora to thrive. And you're gonna have access to these slides, so. Yeah, sorry, I should have said that at the beginning and see you guys taking pictures. And then last but certainly not least, relax. And this just encourages you to focus on the art of acute and chronic stress management. So of course, stress comes in all kinds of different forms. Emotional stress is pretty obvious, but there's also a lot of physical stress sources that we very often ignore, right? And so too much exercise, insufficient sleep is a major physiologic stress, as well as illness, poor diet, not feeding yourself well or making time for that, not enough downtime, too much caffeine or alcohol is a significant physiologic stress, as well as a pain or injury or surgery that you're recovering from. So practicing pausing, especially before you eat. It's so simple and yet can provide so much benefit. Breathing exercises, I think mindfulness meditation is a really good tool for just about anybody, but especially for those of us who suffer from chronic gut issues. Getting some fresh air and sunshine and exercising, really great at combating chronic stress. Ooh, pumpkin pie came at the perfect time. And practicing good sleep hygiene and letting your body have ample time to rest and recover. So in efforts to be a good steward of your time, I'm going to go through these last little bits more quickly. Acid reflux, or in the chronic state, we refer to that as gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD for short, is basically too much acid and stomach contents coming up through the barrier that's supposed to separate your stomach from your esophagus and irritating your esophageal lining. So obviously that would be manifested by heartburn, discomfort, the sour taste of stomach contents in your mouth. It can be really miserable. In a perfect world, there's a muscle that would keep everything contained to your stomach after you eat it. And that's called your lower esophageal sphincter. It works on a pressure gradient. So when that pressure is high enough and working effectively, everything should stay there. But the inciting foods are typically broken into two categories: foods and beverages which lower that pressure gradient of the lower esophageal sphincter, and then foods that increase acid production. So they're more likely to burn you when they come back up. So foods that lower the pressure would be tobacco, alcohol, caffeine, coffee, but any source of caffeine, a large meal, meat, fried and fattied foods, chocolate, mint is really effective at lowering the pressure, carbonated drinks, and any food sensitivities. They can all do that. And then foods and beverages which increase stomach acid, citrus, spicy foods, alcohol, double hitter, coffee, double hitter, NSAIDs, garlic and onions, or maybe a food that's really special and unique to you. So what else can you do other than eliminating those foods? First of all, eating more plant-based foods, especially colorful plant-based foods, because not only is the fiber helpful to keep things moving down the tube, but those extra antioxidants are a great protective variable to the lining of your esophagus, right? So they can help you with the damage that was caused by the acid reflux. And let's see, eating smaller, more frequent meals. Don't lie down after eating. Taking a short walk after meals to encourage your stomach to empty in a timely way. Minimizing activity, especially overexertive exercise or clothes that pressure your lower esophageal sphincter. And of course, managing your stress, but especially while you're eating. So if you continue to have symptoms, then the 5-hour protocol works really well for this too. And see your doctor, of course, to make sure that you're ruling out any medical causes of acid reflux. Diarrhea is usually a symptom of a bigger problem. It's usually not just limited to that, right? Because it's more of a side effect, namely dysbiosis. But there can be a host of other medical reasons that you would have chronic diarrhea. So at the bottom, I said, if symptoms persist, employ the 5-hour protocol and see your doctor. That should always be a consideration. But foods and beverages that are known to cause diarrhea: greasy and fried foods, chocolate, caffeine, alcohol, and sugar alcohols. They all can affect your propensity to have diarrhea. Consider avoiding gluten and dairy. So gluten, I already mentioned to you, but dairy is a consideration because the ability to digest dairy lives on the innermost wall of your gut. That's where lactase is. It's called a brush border enzyme source. That's where lactase is produced, which is the enzyme that digests dairy. So if you're sloughing off the inner lining of your gut because you have something very irritating and inflammatory like diarrhea, then you will inherently lose the ability to digest lactose, often temporary. But continuing to dump more gasoline into the fire is only going to make you more miserable. Focusing on soluble fiber and less insoluble fiber. So soluble fiber, just as a general rule of thumb, lives on the inner of the fruit and the vegetable. It's the flesh. That's what's absorbing all the water, and it does the same in our gut. It helps absorb the water in bulk and stool, which can decrease transit time. And so it's a great tool for you if you feel crummy. Insoluble fiber is like a broom. It pushes things out. So obviously if you have diarrhea, you don't want to promote that further. So you can peel the fruits or the vegetables. That eliminates some of the insoluble fiber that's really rough, right, and hard to digest. And certainly cook down your fruits and vegetables as well. It softens the burden, which is probably why you don't feel like eating a big raw salad when you have profuse diarrhea. But a vegetable soup might be a really good alternative because that's where you would capture more of the soluble fiber. Stress management, that gut-brain axis, so powerful, would be your last key variable. So constipation, probably the most common gastrointestinal complaint in the US, and leads to millions of doctor's visits and hospitalizations every year. Often presents as gas and bloating, abdominal pain, maybe abdominal distension, but can certainly lead to a host of other problems like hiatal hernias, diverticular disease, hemorrhoids, varicose veins, anal fissures. All of those, of course, are very uncomfortable. So stool size and intestinal transit time really make a difference. In fact, these are your primary risk factors for colon cancer, is not fully evacuating your bowel because those toxins are just sitting there, right? And also intestinal transit time because you're not pushing things through, right? So if you really want to figure out how long it's taking for things to fully pass through your digestive tract, you can eat some beets because it stains everything. And it'll give you a strong indication of how long it's really taking for food to pass all the way through. Ideally, you should have a bowel movement from whatever meal you ate 24 to 36 hours after consumption. So that's kind of your window, your prime time window. If it's a lot faster than that, you may not be breaking down your food very well. And then you're missing out on some really valuable nutrients. But if it's too long, then this is clearly something that is worthwhile to investigate. Constipation can be considered a nutrient deficiency disease, and that deficiency is fiber. So just like you can get scurvy from not enough vitamin C, you will, of course, suffer from constipation if you don't have enough fiber. Really aiming for the minimum of 25 to 35 grams a day is the magic mark there. And if you can tolerate more and can accomplish more, I would aim higher. But if you have a high fiber diet and you're hitting that mark, you should be getting all the prebiotics you need too. There's all kinds of benefits for your gut microbiome. And focus, of course, on whole plant-based foods, especially insoluble fibers. Tongue twister. And then, of course, you need sufficient fluid in order to digest all of that fiber. So making sure that you're drinking enough water. A good rule of thumb is the number of ounces that are half your body weight. So if you're 140 pounds, it would be 70 ounces of fluid a day. Okay. Exercise keeps things moving, including the smooth muscle of your gut, and a low-fat diet. Fat is very constipating, actually. It'll work against you. Yeah. Oh, some tools. Yeah, some added tools. And there's all kinds of natural tools that you can employ to offset constipation. Warm water, actually warm water in general is really helpful for that. That's one of the reasons why a daily cup of coffee is so impactful for people, is the warmth of the liquid. It's not just the caffeine, which is a stimulant. Prunes and prune juice, as well as dates, they both have sugar alcohols, polyols, right? They both have sugar alcohols that draw water into your gut and hydrate your bowel, which again can promote movement. Kiwi fruit, lots of soluble fiber. It also has an enzyme that can get things going. Ground flax seeds and chia seeds, as well as fiber powders, are predominantly soluble fiber in bulk and stool. And remember, stool size and stool weight prevents constipation. My favorite soluble fiber is Heather's tummy fiber. It's very tolerable. Psyllium seed husk is probably the most common, but it tends to make people really gassy and uncomfortable. But that tends to be really well tolerated by most people. And then, of course, if your symptoms persist, 5-hour protocol and see your doctor to make sure there's not a bigger issue. Yeah.
So there is some kind of lifelong
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she was just recommending an herbal remedy for that, and that seems like a tool. And there's a host of other tools that have a stimulant effect. My only word of caution is not to lean too heavily or consistently on stimulants, because your gut can get kind of lazy and you want it to, it's a muscle, right? You got to keep it engaged, keep it working for you. And so just be mindful of that. Yes, exercise. I'm a big fan. Okay, so putting it all together, my top 10 steps for good gut health would be to take control of your health. You may find that a GI doctor you've maybe seen in the past is very procedural focused. And so knowing there's lots of other resources out there to educate yourself and get the help that you need. Eating a well-rounded plant-based diet that maximizes fiber. Certainly an enzyme can help you do that, but all those good prebiotics and fiber are really important for your gut microbiome. Minimizing irritants like caffeine, alcohol, and tobacco. Please practice caution with that ibuprofen you pop every night for your sore knee or whatever can really have a huge impact on your gut over time. Keeping a food symptom journal to identify problem foods and culprits, or maybe considering testing for food sensitivities. Aiming to incorporate more fermented foods, prebiotics, and if needed, a quality probiotic supplement. Drinking lots of water and staying well hydrated. Managing your stress. Exercise, especially outside in the sunshine and the fresh air. That's such a world of good for your mind, your body, and your gut. Taking time with meals, really slowing down, hitting the pause button and chewing thoroughly. And being persistent in seeking help if you need. Because this is a very complex issue. It's even hard for me to capture it in a presentation like this. And so it's very possible that you need a practitioner to help guide you. I have a list of dietitians locally who do that. Crystal is another great resource, dietitian locally who practices functional and integrative nutrition, or even reaching out to Diane Rishikoff, the dietitian that I mentioned in my presentation today. So thank you for being here. And thank you. Any questions that I can address? Yeah. George.
There seems like a little bit of a contradiction. You said to space your meals apart so that your guts have time to run it through and then rest a little bit.
Yeah.
Then when you talk about acid reflux, you said eat small meals more
frequently. Yeah. Totally contradictory, isn't it? So his question was, when does the fasting between meals apply versus small frequent meals? It depends on your obstacle that you're tackling. So if you have acid reflux, you don't want to overload your stomach with too much at a time, because volume is what compromises the pressure of your lower esophageal sphincter. And that's what's regurgitating, right? And so smaller, more frequent meals would decrease gastric volume, which would help that pressure gradient stay intact by not putting too much in your stomach at a time. Versus stimulating your migrating motor complex is more specific to SIBO. SIBO is a very common struggle. It can be really hard to treat, but is often misdiagnosed as IBS. And basically what's happening in SIBO is there's too much bacteria living in your small bowel because food is sitting there fermenting. And so the way that you can encourage it not to is by stimulating your muscle, the smooth muscle of your gut, to like push it through so it's not sitting there and fermenting. And so if you have a fasting window of 4 to 5 hours between your meals, then it's more likely to pass through, clear out, and the bacteria have nothing to eat.
So what I found is that eating is a habit.
And you can't live without that habit either.
If you eat 2 meals a day, that becomes your habit.
Mm-hmm.
And if you eat at the same time every day, and that's when you get hungry.
Yeah.
So it kind of just depends on what you decide.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of the things that I mentioned are definitely a mindset change. It's very difficult to change the way you eat and the foods that you eat. Even incorporating a supplement consistently can be incredibly difficult because we're such creatures of habit. And so you have to be ready to take on that change if you feel like you want a different outcome, which is not easy. Any other questions or comments? Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. My pleasure. All right. Well, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. And thank you again to our wonderful helpers in the kitchen. Even though they're invisible, they're hard at work. And for Matt for bringing down the produce and sharing the farm for us.